Good morning, kiddos. We're going to do some training over Vex, over some setups. I'm probably going to do more than one video of different things that I think you should practice when building Vex to give it more of a stable structure that will be more reliable. But first, we need to understand some basic concepts about certain parts. Uh, right now, I'm going to talk about the gears and the sprocket. Sprocket uses a chain. The gears use other gears to turn other gears. So what we need to know is actually how we set these gears up or these sprockets so the motor can turn them. And also at the same time, so when the motor turns this gear, it will turn this gear, and that gear will turn the shaft. The motor turns a shaft, and the shaft goes into the gear, and the shaft turns the gear, and that gear turns another gear, and then you would have a shaft inside that gear that this gear would turn, or depending on if you've got a long chain. But basically, um, you, you need to have the shaft have control of the gear or the sprocket. And I've noticed that some of you, when you're building your vehicles, your VEX vehicles, that you're not understanding there's a plastic insert and there's a metal insert. So let's talk about those two items right now. This is the metal insert. This is the plastic insert. And I don't know if you can see it, if we can get a good view of it or not. Trying to. And if you'll notice that the inside of the green one is round, and the inside of the gray one or the metal one is square, like your Minecraft. God, I can't believe I used the M word, but yes, kind of like in Minecraft. And it's square on the outside. Well, the only squareness about this plastic insert is on the outside, and that's just allow it to fit inside either the gear or the sprocket. Okay? Um, this one will not give us control of the gear or the sprocket. The metal one will give us control, and I will give you an example of that. If I took the metal one and put it inside this sprocket, if I can get it in there to line up just right. It's a little difficult to get in. I'll use this, this kind of helps you get it situated where you can slide it in. So I'm going to take the plastic one. I'm going to use the gear to help me line it up as well with my hand. Get that in there. And you'll notice that when I put it in the plastic one and I rotate it, the shaft is turning, but really the sprocket, the gear is not. So that means is this shaft does not have control of this gear. But you want this attached to the motor, and the motor turns the shaft, and the shaft turns the gear. Well, with this plastic insert, it will not turn this gear. It will not. It'll slip a whole lot. There's no control of it. But if we take the sprocket and put it in this one using the metal insert, now watch the difference. There's control. I can stop it, spin it, stop it, spin it the other way, stop it. That gives you control of this sprocket, the metal insert. So if you want control of the gear, you're going to have to use a metal one. And I think I have a red gear that has the metal one correctly. This is the one you would use. So if I was to put that in there, guess what would happen? I can control it. So when I have a gear connected to it, it'll rotate that gear. it'll rotate the gear. See? So this gives you control. So you will need the metal insert for to have, so the shaft will have control of the gear and the sprocket. And depending on what the others, and matter of fact, when you put the metal inserts, it needs to be on both sides, not just one side. See how I only have it on this side? There should be one on each side, just like this one and that one. And this one here, one on each side. You need to have one on both sides. Okay. For this, for instance, if you're trying to get this, the motor's attached to this sprocket, which will rotate a chain, and if the chain's connected to this one, and you have a shaft going through it, you want to use a metal insert as well, because whatever the shaft is attached to, where the chain is attached to the sprocket is attached to the shaft, and whatever that shaft is attached to, whatever you're trying to turn, won't turn if you use one of these plastic inserts. Okay. Now, if you just want the sprocket just to spin and not have control of that sprocket and make it turn something, then yeah, you would probably use that, because it would just sit there. It'd be freely sitting there. It'd be in neutral gear. If you understand what neutral gear is in a car, when you put a car in neutral, you can push it. Even though the engine's running, you can push it by hand, front or back. Well, this puts the sprocket or gear in neutral. Most of the time, we would not want a sprocket or a gear in neutral. All right, but there is occasions that we may want to do that. Okay. Give you an example. If we're turning a gear to turn another gear, we would want that gear to be in neutral, because the gear is turning this gear, and that gear is turning another gear, which has no control or anything. So the gear is turning gear on a gear. That's when you would use a neutral, a plastic insert right there, because what's actually turning the gear is the meshing of the. So most of the time, if you use a neutral plastic insert, it would be used with the gears and not with the sprockets. Okay. So if that helps any, but the driving gear, the one that's connected to the motor, will use a metal insert, because you want control of the driving sprocket. I mean, the driving gear. But the other gears would use a neutral gear, unless one of these gears you want that's spinning, you want it to control a shaft, and that's when you would use a metal insert. Other than that, you most likely would use a plastic insert, because you want it to be neutral on the shaft. I hope you understand that. Also, I want to cover that same conversation with the motor. Make it look nice and blurry, hopefully. If you'll notice inside here, there's a indentation down there, and that's where the shaft has, the motor has control of the shaft, but it doesn't give you a whole lot of control. It's just a little. It's not very deep at all. But we're blurry here, so hopefully I'm going to back it up a little bit. So, but you notice a big square, right? Well, on most of your motors, you need to always use one of these plastic inserts. I mean, metal inserts, I'm sorry. You want to use the metal insert, so when it goes down, even if it came out of that little space down there, you'd still have control over that shaft, even if it slid out. Even I can go almost all the way out to the very edge, and that motor would still have control of that shaft. That's why you want to use that metal insert. I don't know why they did not make this a permanent situation. There could be a time that you might use a plastic insert, but at this moment, I just can't think of one. Maybe later on, if I can understand it, I will do a video on it. Okay, but other than that, every time you use one of these motors, you need to always use one of the metal inserts so you have a more of a control of the shaft. So you would normally use a metal insert on the motor, and you would most of the time always use a metal insert on sprockets, because you would use a motor to drive a sprocket to turn another sprocket. That sprocket would be turning a shaft most of the time. Well, on gears, you would only use it in the driving sprocket. It could be this one, the driving one, and not this one, or vice versa. But whichever one is connected to the motor, you would put the metal insert, and in the others you would use the plastic insert, unless you were trying to drive a shaft in one of those gears. You can do, you can have different speeds of shafts. For instance, if you had this one turning, this one would go really fast, but you could have another one here. So if you put a shaft in here, have a controlling shaft in here, if you have the metal insert here plugged to a shaft from the motor will spin this one, and then you can have a metal insert here, have another shaft. This shaft will spin really fast, and then you can have another shaft in here with a metal insert, and this one will be spinning slow. So you could have a fast and a slow moving shaft, depending on what you're trying to achieve. So hopefully you understand the metal insert for the shafts and the plastic insert for the shafts. Remember, this puts puts whatever you're running in neutral, and this one puts it in control or drive. All right, this is putting it in gear, and this is taking out of gear. So and always put one in the Vex motors.